Gilberto Ventura, with an extensive criminal history, was a criminal. Gilberto Ventura Ceballos was born in the Dominican Republic on July 6, 1975. He arrived in Panama on July 15, 2008, spending 3 months there before getting to know the country. He escaped from prison in the Dominican Republic and ended up going into hiding. Thinking that he would never be caught for new crimes, he turned to his friend Alki Valladent for help. Together they killed 5 young people in that country. He escaped justice for the sake of his people. Moreover, he used false documents, and not the only ones, to enter Panama, where he was identified as Fermin Antonio T.S. Ramirez. His criminal history in the Dominican Republic indicates that he committed crimes under the alias Fermin Antonio T.S. Veras. 3 more identification documents of Colombian origin were also found: Sefri Era Ceballos Angel Betancourt and Carlos Alberto Agri Valenci. As a result of the study of these documents, it was established that he had a long criminal history in the Dominican Republic. In 2003, the country's Chinese community became the next target. In October 2004, Gilberto was detained and sentenced to 20 years in prison for the kidnapping of a Chinese merchant named Stink Ho Wan, whose family paid him 1 million Dominican pesos. Gilberto committed the kidnapping while posing as a police officer, according to his case materials. For the sake of this scam, he stole 88,000 Dominican pesos from the owners of the college. In addition, he was helped in this by a retired military man who was responsible for using a pistol to subdue the victim. After his rescue, the traitor stated that he was not physically abused by the kidnappers. However, since they threatened to kill him every day, he was subjected to serious psychological abuse. Moreover, as I already mentioned, the man was released into the bushes in a remote area without any help from Gilberto. He was arrested, brought to trial, but did not serve his sentence because he escaped from prison on November 30, 2004 and hid for several years in the Dominican Republic. However, he felt that in this country the police could catch him at any time, so he decided to move to Panama. Gilberto usually used the services of Fermin when he was in Panama, and with his help he opened a bank account and began working in the store as an administrator. After some time, Gilberto found a woman with whom he immediately fell in love and soon married. Having become acquainted for several months with Alki Valladent Vi, a man whom he met while working in this business, Gilberto told him that he had an offer for him. The goal of this man was to once again attack the Chinese community, but this time in Panama. He intended to kidnap the children of Chinese businessmen and demand a large ransom for them. Gilberto invited his friend to join him in this plan and he immediately agreed. However, Gilberto did not intend to commit this crime in Panama alone. For this crime, he had already broken the law by agreeing to cooperate with a person who could deceive. However, in the end, Gilberto was always looking for ways to commit crimes to get easy money. As for Alki Vida C. Mendez, he was born on May 1, 1968, and upon arriving in Panama on an unspecified date, he opened 2 mobile phone stores. As I previously mentioned, after some time of talking and with sufficient trust from the partners of Alki Valladent, the first victim of these 2 criminals was Yesenia RGS Liu, the 3rd daughter of the owners of a famous store in La Chorrera. Yesenia very determinedly entered the technological university and studied well. Her dream was to work on Panamanian television. He had problems with the country's authorities due to non-payment of alimony and various cases of fraud. Just like Gilberto, she began combining her education with helping her parents in the store at a very early age. Investigation revealed that every business owner in the area knew and adored her. As I mentioned earlier, Yesenia became the first victim of the crime of these 2 men, which they had been planning for months before it began to take place. October 20, 2010, the girl left her parents' house, which was located on the top floor of the house where they owned the store, got into her car and went to the university. Since it was early in the morning, there were not many cars around, which made it difficult to abduct her. These persons took possession of 2 vehicles. One belonged to Alcibiades Sue and the other was hired. After following the young girl for a kilometer until they reached her university, Alcibiades hit her in reverse and got out of the car. She stopped and rolled down the window, knowing the man from his company that sold mobile phones very similar to her own. Yesenia trusted this man because she knew him well, but she did not know that another car was following them, from which Gilberto came out waving a pistol. He forced the girl to get into his car and they drove away from the scene to a rented house in the L Avenue area. Arriving at the crime scene, they locked Yesin in the bathroom and demanded a ransom of $200,000 from the girl's family. Since the amount was too large, the family was unable to collect the entire amount, and 2 days after the abduction, on October 22nd, Gilberto killed Yesin. The man asked Albaidez to leave the house and set off several fireworks but returned to find that Gilberto had already killed the girl. The fireworks were supposed to mask the sound of the kidnapping. The family members apparently had no idea what had happened, so they printed out posters and began putting them up around the house and other places in the hope that Yesenia was still alive. Unfortunately, no leads were found as a result, and the family told the media that when they first heard about during the abduction, they thought it was a joke. But when they heard the recording of the little girl, they were convinced of it. After that, they dug a shallow grave, put Yesenia's corpse there and began to cover it with earth. Unfortunately, as I already said, they were kept in the dark for several months after the first unsuccessful attempt to kidnap Yesenia. A month and a half later, the men made a second attempt to kidnap. This time the victim was 27-year-old Yunwa, who owned his own store. He met with Alcibiades Sam to arrange a meeting to complete the purchase of several mobile phones that he offered him. They met at the man's house to complete the agreement, but it turned out to be a farce that Alcibiades and Gilberto came up with to kidnap him. Gilberto Ventura was driving a car in which Alcibiades tricked him into getting into. They took him to the same house where they killed Yesenia, subdued him with a pistol, tied him up and gagged him. Then they pulled him out of the car, put him in a tank of water so as not to attract attention, and buried him under the kitchen floor. After that, they forced him to record a video in which they demanded ransom, this time a larger sum of money. Their desired amount was $400,000. Young's wife Ana Rosa was only able to get $83,000 and Gilberto agreed to the exchange during negotiations. But only Ana Rosa, who was expecting her second child at the time, fulfilled her half of the deal. She went to an empty parking lot with money. The kidnappers told her that her husband would be released and could reunite with his family in a few hours. The woman began to wait. However, by this time, Yun Lin Wu had already died. The men set off fireworks in the same way as with the ash trees. The wife had to wait for her husband, who never showed up because the kidnapping was arranged for them, and the thieves divided the money to hide the execution and bury him in the same place. But they want more, so they began to prepare for a new kidnapping. The next victim was Sammy Zenchin, the eldest of the 3 sons of a well-known businessman in La Chorrera. He was 19 years old, and the guys began to follow him without knowing how to do it secretly, as a result of which some people saw them. Contrary to expectations, the intervention of the police did not stop the criminals. The next day they repeated the same pattern. On September 6, 2011, someone called the police and reported the presence of strangers in the area. The police responded to the tip and detained the suspects, and found no reason to take them into custody. As in your case, early in the morning when he was driving along the Panama Highway, they themselves crashed into the car. However, everything did not go as planned. The young man was not traveling alone. He was with his girlfriend Georgie and his childhood friend Joel Mauricio Luwanga, with whom he studied in high school and university. Georgina was a girl of 11 months and was studying to become an engineer. The kidnappers were surprised by this but still decided to carry out their plan. 3 young people were captured. The guys sealed their lips and threatened them with 2 firearms, after which they were put in a car and taken to the house where the first artiste had already been killed. As usual, Alcibiades had to take care of the 3 kidnapped people and Gilbert had to contact the family and try to get all the money. However, there was a problem with this operation. The guys thought that maybe they could get away since there were 3 of them against 1. Gilberto discovered that the best course of action would be to use Joel to demand a ransom after the first victim tried to escape and was shot in the leg by Alcibiades. The wound proved fatal and the man bled to death. Georgie, his girlfriend, was lucky not to be buried alive in the same grave next to him. However, instead of Joel's family, they approached Joel's family and demanded a ransom. Joel made a recording for them and was buried alive along with his friends. The family refused to pay the ransom and demanded $4 million but eventually agreed to pay $160,000. The father claimed that he ultimately paid nothing because the men refused to show him evidence that his son was still alive, which led him to conclude that they were already dead and ended negotiations. However, the kidnappers provided him with important information. The man was ordered to throw the money in a deserted area where there were supposed to be many red bags. The father himself went to the nearest stores and asked if any of the men had bought an odd number of red bags. At that very moment, he managed to get a video from the store's CCTV camera of which a man can be seen buying these red bags. He immediately recognized this man. It was Alcibiades and Mendez, whom the father himself knew. After the family of the kidnapped identified the kidnapper, they reported this to the police, who managed to free him while he was in the house of his ex-partner Inés Torres. By that time, Gilberto Ventura had already left the country of Alcibiades and immediately confessed to all the atrocities committed by him and his accomplice, describing them in detail. Naturally, he also reported the location of the bodies of the kidnapped young people, which allowed the Panamanian police to find them. Her friend Georgina and friend Joel died of asphyxia after being buried alive according to the forensic examination, which also showed that she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Alcibiades never denied his role in what happened and even expressed regret to the families of the victims. The man was detained several months after the arrest of his accomplice. He was hiding in the Dominican Republic. In an effort to avoid identification, the man dyed his hair blonde and left several scars on his fingers when he was caught, according to police. He deliberately inflicted these wounds on himself to prevent his fingerprints from being registered fingers after Gilberto was detained by authorities in the Dominican Republic. Authorities said they would extradite him only if the Panamanian government agreed not to sentence him to more than 30 years in prison, which is the longest possible sentence in the Dominican Republic. In the end, an agreement was reached between the two countries and Gilberto was sent to stand trial in Panama. Unlike Alcibiades S.A. Gilberto Ventura, who consistently denied his involvement in the events and claimed that the real culprits were the Panamanian military, a number of other people who received money were taken into custody. During the second abduction, Inés Torres was there. In September 2015, 4 years after the discovery of the bodies and without any progress in the investigation, the Chinese community held a mass in memory of those killed in it. The president of the Chinese Association of Panama stated that they felt misled by the authorities because they had promised them a thorough and speedy investigation. Alcibiades' ex-girlfriend Dalmira, the man's daughter-in-law, and his stepdaughter were involved in brutal crimes because they were responsible for money laundering. Investigators also found handcuffs and ammunition at the crime scene. But nothing has changed in all these years. He added that the consequences of the tragedy forced the families of some victims to sell their businesses to deal with health problems and fight alcoholism. Gilberto Ventura Ceballos was not going to easily submit to justice since he had already escaped from prison in the Dominican Republic and was planning to do so in Panama in December 2016 during an alleged meeting with his lawyer. However, many violations were committed during this escape. Gilberto was placed in a maximum security colony, but for some reason the warden demanded a meeting with a lawyer. As a result, Gilberto was transferred to a prison with a much lower level of security, which is confirmed by surveillance cameras and the testimony of several prisoners. It turned out that Gilberto and the lawyer entered the prison kitchen where the accused was able to change clothes into women's clothing and wigs. When the escape became known, a reward of $50,000 was offered, and several operations were carried out in connection with it. According to testimony, this inmate offered her $25,000, of which he gave her $10,000 to fulfill all the agreements. The man's alleged lawyer was detained for involvement in his escape. When Ventura VS was still alive in June 2017, he had to borrow a car to buy women's clothing and a wig, and pay a national police officer and a prison guard to force him to slip into the kitchen and escape. The first hearings have begun in the case of the kidnapping and murder of 5 young men. Alcibiades Mendez expressed his condolences to the families and people of Panama. He denied any involvement in the murder of any of the kidnappers and stated that the confrontation with the Sami did not go as planned. He also named Gilberto Caiduz as the person responsible for killing the first 2 victims and burying the other 2 alive, claiming that Gilberto was involved in the organization as a whole. 2 months after the hearings began in September of that year, when the families decided who would be charged and that he was just a pawn, Gilberto and Ventura were detained and therefore could attend the trial when he once again stated that he had nothing to do with the crimes. Finally, on June 22, 2018, the trial officially began. Gilberto Ventura Lq. Mendez was sentenced by the second instance court to 50 years in prison for the premeditated kidnapping and murder of 5 young people. The women detained for their involvement in this case were also sentenced to 5 years in prison, and Gilberto Ventura S.E. Balios received an additional 5 years for both escape and conspiracy to commit a crime. Let us recall that this man's sentence was reduced from 50 to 30 years in prison after an agreement was concluded between Panama and the Dominican Republic that he would serve no more than 30 years in prison. However, this was not the end of Ventura's story. On February 4, 2020, he escaped from Panama once again. Considering his escape in the Dominican Republic, this was his third escape. On this occasion, he once again received help from prisoners. He was assisted by at least 3 security guards and was apparently caught on camera as he escaped. Gilberto Ventura's Balios was apprehended 9 days later on February 13. The killer was then flown by helicopter back to Palma City under heavy guard. When he arrived in the capital of the country, he was taken to the National Police Oncology Department, where he was treated for apparent dehydration and then taken to prison. It should be noted that as a result of this second escape, the Minister of Security resigned and the Minister of Government was dismissed with his position. According to representatives of the Chinese community in Panama, there are many contradictions in the actions of the police. For example, during the abduction of the second victim, Yun, a GPS navigator was activated on his phone, which allowed his wife to track him in real time. She reported this to the authorities. However, they didn't seem to think anything of what was happening, so these men killed 5 young men for financial gain, and Gilberto Ventura was still looking for a way to increase his earnings by writing a book about his horrific actions as soon as he was released from prisons. Friends, write your opinion in the comments, and also subscribe to the channel and watch my other videos. Thank you all.